After 7 years of war, Damascus's shattered eastern suburbs are one of the few anti-Assad strongholds left. Rebel fighters control these neighborhoods, but civilians still live here, sitting ducks for the shells and missiles. What have we done to deserve this? Wails one man right after
Syrians in the besieged rebel-held area of eastern Ghouta near Damascus have suffered their deadliest week in years. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says government airstrikes have killed more than 230 people.
Jet to enemy fire as Israel confirmed Syrian air defense shot at one of its F-16 fighter jets. The Israeli Prime Minister was blunt.
Israel holds Iran and its Syrian host responsible for today's aggression. We will continue to do whatever is necessary to protect our sovereignty and our security.
The crash followed the shooting down of a drone. Israeli army video shows what they say is an Iranian drone flying towards the northern Golan Heights before it was downed. In retaliation, the Israeli Air Force hit targets in Syria, including the suspected drone command center, Iranian targets, and Syrian air defense. Syria launched surface-to-air missiles during the Israeli raid and says it shot down the F-16, which crashed in northern Israel.
The
Syrian political leadership took a decision at the highest level to face decisively any Israeli military aircraft over Syrian airspace. Today Syria did what it promised by downing an Israeli plane and striking at other planes. This is clear for Syria. It is a decisive decision to confront the Israeli Air Force and its careless behaviour.
Both pilots ejected and parachuted to the Israeli side of the border. One is critically injured. The Israeli army spokesman said Iran was behind the launch of the drone, but didn't say whether it was armed or not. Now, the Iranians have reacted. They've said that they are going to stand with Syria against any foolishness by Israel. The Russians have also reacted, saying that Israel needs to respect Syrian state sovereignty. Also, what we're hearing is that the Israelis want to send a strong message to the Russians to get Iran out of the region. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera, West Jerusalem.
A war in Syria escalated today. Israel launched a large-scale assault on Iranian targets inside Syria, and one of its fighter jets was shot down. Iran and Syria accuse Israel of aggression. The U.S. State Department blames Iran for the escalation of violence. Roxana Saberi has the latest from our London bureau.
The Israeli F-16 crashed in northern Israel after coming under fire from Syria. Both pilots ejected. Israel says the jet was one of several it scrambled on Saturday after it intercepted an Iranian drone that entered Israeli airspace. Israel later carried out more strikes in Syria. Syria has turned into an international battlefield. A week ago, Syrian rebels shot down a Russian jet. Video released on social media claims to show the pilot parachuting from the plane before he reportedly killed himself to avoid being captured. And over the past few weeks, Turkey has launched an offensive against U.S.-backed Kurdish fighters in northern Syria, claiming they are terrorists. At a hospital in the northern city of Afrin, this doctor says every day his team is treating huge numbers of civilians injured in the attacks. The death toll is soaring across Syria. The UN says it's received reports of nearly 300 civilians killed just in the past week, many in airstrikes by the Syrian government, and many of them children. UN spokeswoman Elizabeth Throssell.
Syria has seen 7 bloody years, but even by Syrian standards, this past week has been grim, it has been shameful, it has been deplorable.
Complicating the issue, the U.S. says it launched airstrikes against pro-regime fighters on Wednesday, but in self-defense. The Pentagon says around 2,000 U.S. troops are in Syria, helping in the fight against ISIS. Rena?
Roxanne Sabera.
Everyone knows what's coming when they hear this. Russian and Syrian warplanes overhead signal another strike, and then frantic sprints to reach the wounded and rush them to safety. Medical help is basic. The local clinics ill-equipped. After 7 years of war, Damascus's shattered eastern suburbs are one of the few anti-Assad strongholds left. Rebel fighters control these neighborhoods, but civilians still live here, sitting ducks for the shells and missiles. What have we done to deserve this? Wails one man right after a strike. Take your fight to the battlefield. We've had enough. But even when we last visited this area in 2013, it was already a battlefield. Now it's under siege and under intensive attack. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says there have been 35 airstrikes here in the past 24 hours alone. We can't independently verify these videos, but they were filmed by the White Helmets, the famous rescue service, as well as local activists. And they say that among the dead, with numbers still rising, are at least 18 children.
Syrians in the besieged rebel-held area of eastern Ghouta near Damascus have suffered their deadliest week in years. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says government airstrikes have killed more than 230 people in the last 4 days. France has called on Russia to do everything it can to get its Syrian ally to ease the growing humanitarian crisis. The conflict is raging on 2 other fronts. Turkey is waging an offensive against Kurdish fighters in Afrin in the northwest, while Syrian government forces are pounding the rebel-held province of Idlib. This is the moment an airstrike hit what's said to be a building of the White Helmets in Khan Sheikhoun. The volunteer rescue group said 3 of its workers were killed in 2 different airstrikes. Meanwhile, Turkey has been firing more rockets into Syria's Afrin region. It's targeting Kurdish YPG militias, which it views as a terrorist group. Authorities in Afrin say at least 160 people have been killed and tens of thousands more have been displaced since the start of the offensive last month.
A day after losing one of their F-16s to Syrian air defense missiles, Israel issuing a strong warning this Sunday. Major General Yoel Strick quoted in the Times of Israel saying, Iran wants to establish a forward operating base in Syria whose goal is attacking Israel. We will not allow it. With that, let's bring in Benjamin Netanyahu's spokesman, David Keyes. David, nice to see you as always. Forgive me, but doesn't Iran already have a forward operating base in Syria and one in Lebanon called Hezbollah?
Well, Hezbollah is a real threat, but what we've seen Iran attempt to do over the previous months and the previous years is to increase their presence right along Israel's border. And as the general said, we will simply not allow that to happen.
So,
everywhere that Iran is present in the Middle East, we find death and destruction, whether it's mass death in Syria, whether it's support for Hamas and Hezbollah,
what are the red
Israel.
lines? What are the red lines for Israel? When you say we will not allow it, what brings Israeli military action?
Well, first of all, we won't allow ourselves to be fired upon, and anytime we are fired upon, we will respond in kind. Israel won't allow the transfer of heavy weaponry from Iran through Syria to Lebanon, and Israel won't allow Syria to become a forward operating base of the Iranian regime, a regime which openly calls for Israel's destruction, which inscribes its missiles with Israel will be wiped out. We simply have to take these threats seriously, even if some other people don't.
Well, in the right-hand side of the screen, so the viewers know what we're watching gun sight video, both from Israeli Apache helicopters shooting down the drone that came into Israel yesterday, and then the video of the bombing in retaliation over and over again. I know you may not admit to it, but Israel has been bombing targets inside Syria for a couple of years now to prevent those transfers of heavy weapons, but you've never lost an F-16 in the process. This is what Hezbollah has to say. It says this is the beginning of a new strategic error which puts an end to the violation of Syrian airspace and territory, talking about them being able to shoot down that F-16. Are they right? Do military tactics have to change? Is there concern about Israeli air superiority?
This is not a new strategic era. Their capabilities have increased, but so has Israel's. And Israel had a very serious and very significant retaliation to this unprovoked attack. But I think it sheds light on a deeper problem of Iran. Iran is attempting to take over not only the Middle East, but as the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard said, they're on the path to the rule of Islam worldwide. And that's the goal of Iran, the total domination by radicals, the total subversion of democracy. And that's why it's so important that Americans and Europeans and people all over the world understand the nature of this regime. On the one hand, they say they're moderate, but since the nuclear deal has been signed, we've seen a marked increase in Iran's aggression, in Iran's death, in its destruction, and its support for terrorism worldwide.
Well, and also its willingness to project power as well. The one thing we haven't talked about is Russia. They're really in control of Syria. They're certainly the ones behind Bashar Assad's survival over the past couple of years. That Israeli F-16 was brought down by Russian-made surface-to-air missiles. I know your boss, the Prime Minister, talked to President Putin yesterday. What'd they say? What assurances have been given to you by the Russians that they're not going to allow Iran to continue to operate?
Well, they had a very good conversation, and military cooperation between the two states continues, and that cooperation has prevented many tragedies from occurring, so it's important for Israel's national interest. But we've never for one second taken our eye off the ball, which is that the Iranian regime's attempts to colonize the Middle East, to take over Syria, to bring in Shiite militias, to support Hezbollah.
David, I understand this, but I gotta button this up. If Syria has air defense missiles that can bring down Israeli planes, that's a real threat to Israeli national security and your ability to stop the group you're just talking about in Iran. Is there going to be a push by the Israeli government to tell the Russians, you've got to pull some of this top-notch hardware back?
Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Putin have had many good conversations on this topic, and we continue to express our red lines. But it must be said that the command and control structure that actually launched this drone was run by Iran, and that's why Israel had no choice but to take out those command and control structures, and will continue to levy heavy responses against any provocation, against any rocket and missile attacks, against any terrorism aimed at Israel.
In reports, at least, that yesterday took out a lot of the Syrian air defense network. Conceivably, those targets were pre-picked. David, appreciate you being with us, as always, sir.
For the second time within 2 months, an Israeli airstrike targeted a research center near the Syrian capital, Damascus, on Wednesday. A statement from the General Command of the Syrian Armed Forces confirmed the attack and said most of the missiles have been destroyed.
This attack on Damascus comes to support terrorists and weaken any political result from the peace talks in Sochi and Astana. and activates Turkey-Saudi Arabia ties to refund terrorist group in Idlib province. The Israeli airstrikes came to fuel the conflict and spread chaos again.
The Israeli airstrike accompanied an escalation by militants in eastern Ghouta, who shelled Damascus residential areas with dozens of mortars and rockets on Wednesday, causing casualties and victims, including children and women.
There are mortars every day, and we have no choice but to remain steadfast and continue our lives.
What terrorists couldn't gain in politics and in the battlefield, they will not gain by shelling Damascus by mortars.
The assaults against Damascus come before holding the 9th round of Astana talks and amid the renewed U.S. accusation against the Syrian government, claiming it uses chemical weapons against civilians. Amid all the assaults against Damascus, the government has underscored that the Israeli airstrikes are aimed at supporting terrorists to help them make advances on the ground. And the Syrian army will not stop its operation until the complete liberation of